Good morning, everyone. This is Chris Dew, the Popdock product manager from E1, and I'm excited that we're all here together to talk about accessing your historical Dynamics SL data right inside of Dynamics 365 Finance. So let's get started right away. Very quick agenda. We're going to discuss a couple terms we'll be using today. We'll talk about kind of our overall migration strategy to make sure that you have every aspect of this covered if you're just considering it. And then we'll spend most of our time really focusing on viewing that historical data inside of finance and everything surrounding that whole thing. Okay, I promised some terms, so let's talk quickly about what these terms are. Again, I think many of you, if you are considering some F&O or finance, Dynamics 365 finance, you probably have been introduced to the term Azure Data Lake, but for some, it's still a mystery. So what is it? It's essentially a storage account inside of the customer's account. So all the data does get stored in that environment. It also is really a way of storing stuff in an unstructured way. That means we can store CSV files next to XML files, next to JPEGs, next to Excel files. That's kind of the unstructured part about it. Whereas, in the past, maybe where we had the database that had tables, now this is something where we can actually dump everything from a table into a particular format. So that's really the mystery of the Azure Data Lake. It's just a place for us to store that information inside of your Azure environment. Now, the one thing I will comment on this is typically gets to be a developer exercise. We've really made it easy to do both things. One is to actually move the data to your data lake, and then also reading the data from your data lake. So that's where Popdock comes in, and we'll focus on that. Okay, I just mentioned moving the data to the data lake. That's one of the most challenging things that, again, oftentimes gets a developer involved. Well, we're going to be talking about the Popdock Data Lake upload tool. This is a tool that is going to do a number of things for you. It's going to securely extract the data out of your SL environment, and then it is also going to place it inside of the data lake and in your Popdock account, make sure that those lists are available and all those aspects of it, so that we can then utilize it to embed inside of our F&O system. So I think that's all I'll say about that one for now, but I just want to let you know that we're going to be talking about this term. Well, both of these terms are going to come up quite a bit today, and so I wanted to just give you a heads up. Okay, I think it's important to talk about overall migration strategy because many of you have been on, an on-premise system, meaning that you often are hosting your own SQL Server that has your SL data in it. Some of you have maybe moved that to an Azure virtual machine. Some of you have possibly hosted with a partner. Whatever your scenario is, right, we have it covered. And this is what I think is important, is that many of you, again, we're going to be focusing on Popdock as a solution today of extracting that data out of SL and making it available. But I think it's important to mention our Smart Connect tool, because there are times when you maybe need to move some of those master records because you're actually going to use them inside of the F&O environment, whether they be like vendors or customers or inventory, employees, whatever it may be. Those kind of master records, you're going to need to get them over there. And so Smart Connect is a great tool to help you with that transformation process. Okay, but we're going to focus on what Popdock can do for you today to allow you to access all that history that you are unable to get really by any tool out there, to dump all that history inside of that solution. That's oftentimes really expensive, and sometimes, I won't say impossible, but there's some more complexity if you have 20 years of data. Like, how do you really want to open up 20 years inside of Dynamics 365 Finance and import them into all the years and close years and stuff like that? There's a lot of complexity to some stuff like that, and especially if you have a lot of volume, you may not want to go that route. But we're going to focus on, again, on the history that it's really hard to move or show inside of there. So a couple of key points that we're going to talk about is we have the capability of seeing just the history. So that means, right, if we want to pull a list that has just the historical information from your SL system, and we can now pull that in there. We can also combine that archive data, we can combine it with the live data from F&O. And so now I can have one list that has everything that I need that has both systems. So I don't have to go hunting all over the place to find the information. It's now one list that has everything I need. We can even place these lists in other places where we may want to see it by customer or vendor or account or item. And so that information can be put in any of those places. So what I think we'll start out with is, why don't we see it in action, and then we can kind of take it from there and deconstruct it. So let me switch over. Okay, and instead of starting inside of Popdock, we're going to start right inside of F&O. Or sorry, I'm going to say F&O probably quite a bit, or finance, or FinOps, whatever you want, but hopefully we're talking about the same thing. So I'm going to start by clicking on this dashboard here. And what's unique about this dashboard, this is Popdock embedded inside of here, and gives us really a nice capability of filtering and searching across all kinds of data, whether it be, current stuff from the live system, or again, we're going to be focusing on a migration scenario. So I'm going to turn this around, and I'm actually going to show you some AR transactions that are coming from an archived SL account. All right, Skippy's just jumping around a little bit here. Oh, let me refresh this here. Get back down here. Let me try that one more time. Oh, there we go. Must have just got hung up. Okay, so what we're seeing in this case, this is the archived AR transactions that came from our quick queries in SL, and we moved them to the data lake, and now we are able to look inside of here. Now, the beautiful part, some of the things, like I can pull in other columns, right? So if I want to see the created date and created user, or some other column, I can add those columns even though they're sitting in data lake. I'm able to now interact with it. And the other part that's really nice about this is I can actually still do all the things I want to do. If I want to filter this, group it by customer, now you can see I'm getting all the transactions for this particular customer, or even I'm actually getting totals, right? So for the numeric type fields, I'm getting a total of quantity by customer, or the transaction amount by customer. So you have all those capabilities. You have an unlimited amount of filters. So even if you compare this to the quick queries that you had access to in SL, this is way above what you can do here, because you have unlimited amounts of filters, and it's really, really an easy interface to use. You can change an and to an or by a click, using a click. You can work with dates, right? If I pick like the created date, instead of needing to use any of these ones, and I think probably the most common one is using a between statement, I can leave it at equals, but instead of putting a date field, I can use these comparisons. So I can say, hey, you know what? I really just wanted everything for last year, right, or last quarter, or something like that. And so now you can save these as favorites, and you can quickly go back to, last year, last quarter, last month, last week, this quarter, whatever they may be. You can have 10 favorites that are all around that, and you never have to change the dates when it flips over to a new month or a new quarter or new year. So there's some really nice things that are just built into this filtering and just really, really powerful for end users. So this is that historical data, right? We're showing it right inside of the finance interface, and we never had to leave. Now let me show you another example of this. Instead of just showing you, again, all of the AR transactions, uh, what if I pull up this particular vendor in this case, and what if I wanted to see all of their history that came from SL? And sure enough, you can see we have this embedded with Popdock. We have it embedded right from inside of this interface. And so I'm able to, Skippy's just, he's getting his jump roping in today. So now we can see, here we go, here's all of these vendor transactions. And so we can embed this again, either on like a dashboard, or in this case, it's on a particular page so that we're filtering it down. So just want to give you a couple looks at some of the ways that we can embed that information right inside of there. And again, you never have to leave F&O. So let's talk a little bit more about how do we actually go about accomplishing, getting that data to a place where we can make it available. So we're going to kind of talk about two different areas. First one is really connecting to the data. Again, we're going to be focusing on the quick queries because for a lot of people, that was a really nice, easy interface that had ways for us to, access that data. And again, it combined, some of the data from multiple tables so that you had one view, or a lot of people call it like an entity. So it had everything you needed to know about that particular thing. So we're going to talk about how we connect to the data securely, and then we'll talk about moving it. One really big key point is that the solution we're presenting to you, you do not need to open up a port to your SQL server, or even a hole in the firewall. For like in the past, we've used a gateway. That we actually don't have to do that anymore. So we've eliminated some of the complexity around that and some of the security concerns. Now this is something that occurs right on the customer's network, and there's no need to go outside of that for a connection to their SQL server. It will pull all of the SL lists. And I think one thing to maybe specify, we call things lists generically because sometimes they're a CSV file, sometimes they're a web service API, sometimes it's a SQL query. Whatever it is, we're calling it a list. And in this case, we're using quick queries that are available from SL as the basis for that. So at the end of the day, they're really SQL views, those quick queries are. But just letting you know that this is what we're utilizing to bring all of those user-friendly lists together. We do have another option though. I call it the insurance policy, where it allows us to move everything in that table. So all of your database information, whether it's a custom table or third-party products, whatever it is, this tool will move everything to the Azure Data Lake for you, so you can be assured that if you ever needed to go back 2 years later after you've turned off your SQL server, that is available for you. So that's kind of connecting to the data. Moving the data has some of the same components, but I just want to make sure that you understand what's going to happen next. So what we're going to be doing is running this in the customer's environment. After we connect to the data, which is on-premise, we're going to be moving that data as fast as, again, two areas here, as fast as we can extract it. So let's talk a little bit more about that. We're taking it out of your SQL server, right? So again, this is where the difference between having 1 million records and 100 million records, right, will change the speed that it takes to get those out of your tables. So that's one of those things that for some people, this is a very, very fast process. For somebody that's been using SL for 20 years and again has a terabyte database, it's obviously going to take a little bit longer to get that data out of the database. The second part to this though is actually uploading that data. And so what does that mean? is that we have to move it from the customer's on-premise site up to the Azure Data Lake right in the cloud. And so the biggest factor there is their connection to the internet, and most specifically, it's the upload speed. So again, um, if we're moving a gigabyte of data, it's obviously not going to take quite as long as if you're moving a terabyte of data up to the cloud. So those are just some of those things to consider, I guess, as you're looking at what the connection is as we move the data up there. And then another really key part to this is that we have the capability of fixing the errors, right? If you run into errors inside of here, I'm going to show you in a second that as I run this process, I actually am going to get some errors, and we can kind of talk through what needs to be done to fix them. So I think that's an important part as we get into the demo of this, and we'll make sure come back to that. Okay, let's get into how we actually make this start happening. So if I pull up the Popdock Data Lake upload tool, one of the first things you're going to do is you're going to pick the process we're going to do. And so in this case, we're going to start with copying the quick queries up to the data lake. It'll have you log into your Popdock account. So I'm doing that right now. The very next thing after we get logged into the account is that it will ask us what the data lake connector is. So it'll pull the ones that we've set up inside of Popdock already, and then we just we make our connection back to it again. So now we'll hook into the data lake. The last part, this is really the on-premise piece, right? So you are connecting to your SQL server that hosts SL today. And so again, my sample one that I'm using looks internet facing. Most of you probably won't have an internet facing SQL server, so it'll probably just be something more like SQL Server or something like that. You'll put the port that you're hitting. This is probably a key one. If you have, there's some scenarios, where you may have multiple companies or whatever. We're going to point this to the system database. So this allows us to pull any companies that are available to us. And then again, you'll log into that with a SQL username and password. It does not need to be the SA user. It just needs to be somebody that has read access to all the databases, all the tables and views. And then more importantly, also there is something called sys objects. We need to be able to run those so that we have the metadata about all of the fields that are in those tables and views. So this will connect us to the local SQL system, and then we will get the companies that we want to archive. This is a really important part, right? I have 5 companies. Maybe I don't want to move a couple of them, right? So let me just uncheck those, and I'm just going to move these 3 companies. For many people, they'll have a sandbox or a test system, or again, maybe there's some companies they haven't used in 10 years, and they don't feel that there's anything valuable in there to archive. Whatever the reasoning may be, you have some control over which ones you want to move. So I'll move those 3. And then these are all of the lists, right? The quick queries that I talked about. So these are all those standard ones. And again, any custom ones. So you can see like this SC inventory items, that is a custom quick query that we've written. So it'll pick that up and bring that over as well. So we're going to start this process. A couple things just to point out. You'll see it's telling us how many transactions. So it looks like we probably have about 109 per company that we're bringing over. So it's basically running this for each company to extract that data out and put into our data lake. It tells you how many are left, how many have been completed, how many have failed, and then this is kind of an interesting one, ones that we've skipped. So why would we skip certain stuff? Well, if we ran the query and there's no data in there, it doesn't make any sense to actually put a file up there with nothing in it. And so we're able just to kind of make that a little more efficient process and say there's nothing in that table, so let's move on and I guess just go on to something that we actually has data. So this is this is cranking through. This is almost done. Looks like we've both moved and or extracted and moved it up to the data lake. You can see in this report, we're getting the status, right? So if I look at this, I can see which ones have failed, which ones were skipped. And again, if we went down, the ones that were actually successfully moved up there and the number of records. Okay, so an important part here, right, is if I look at this, we're getting an error message here that the metadata failed. So there's something wrong with my quick query in this example. And so let's say if I went into my quick query, fixed the issue, and then wanted to resubmit it, I could simply do this. I could click the button and say, we're gonna rerun the failure. And so if I do this, now we can see that there we go. It's ran it through one more time. It's only ran it for the lists that I selected. And again, we didn't actually fix anything, so we have the exact same error happening this time again. So that's really it gives us a lot of power on what we're doing. Again, there is a log that if you want to go back and look at the logs and see which ones had failed or succeeded, you can see that. But you can also see we can run this again. Now, why would we run this again? We copied those quick queries, right? That's the ones that you're probably going to use, the main lists that are in there. But we also have this option to copy the tables. So again, make sure that we're logged into our Popdock account so that we're placing everything in the right place. Okay, I got the wrong container there. There we go. So now I have the right data lake, right, hooking back into SL. But here's the difference, right? Instead of companies this time, it's actually giving me the databases. And so here's my system database, and then I have all of my companies in one of these two databases. So what this allows us to do, like I said, this will back up everything that we need to in this case. And so if I go ahead and start running this process, it's going to do it for all three of those databases, and it's going to move, again, looks like 1900 tables are going to get put in there. I think quite a few of them have blank or very minimal data. So this is the insurance policy, right? This is moving every table as opposed to just the quick queries that may be a combination of, a couple different tables in one, giving you that view. So just letting you kind of know the difference. This is that capability that, again, once you turned off your SQL Server, you could go back and you could actually see this again and research, right, any table that you needed to pull back for audit purposes without having to bring your SQL Server back online. Okay, while this is cranking away, let's go back into Popdock, and I want to just show you a couple different things. What's happening here is if I go into this data lake connector, so here's my ADL SL. This is the one that we're populating. First thing to look at, here's all 5 companies, right? So I had ran this previously. That's why we have 5 in there, because remember, I only chose 3 the first time. So if I hadn't cleaned this up, we would only seen these first 3 companies in here, but I had ran it previously with all the companies, and so that's why we see that. And then we have all the lists, right? These are the lists that are available there. They're, again, that were quick queries. So any of them that we have in there will show. And you can still do stuff with these lists, right? If we wanted to go ahead and look at, we'll just keep it simple, right? If we wanted to look at the customer details list, for example, I could go in here, I could look at the fields. You'll see that oftentimes it brings them in just as a string for many of the things inside of here, but it actually is intelligent enough because we know the data, that we know which ones might be a currency or something like that. And again, we can, if we have a currency or quantity, we can actually put a summarization on this as well. So you have a lot of control on this. And again, just because it's in a data lake, we can still do all kinds of things that we want to, where we can make whichever field whichever field's the default, right? So this one has these ones as a default, but you can add or remove them. We can even add calculations. So again, even though it's still sitting in a data lake, we can still have the calculations. And this is one that got brought in, right? It brought the note field in from the other list. The last part I'll just mention before we go back is that we can actually have related information. So even though this is a customer list, if I wanted to have some drill downs to, I don't know, let's just call it AR, right? AR transactions. I could actually point this to, and again, we'll stay in this data lake connector, but I could point to the AR transactions list. And now I can have a way of filtering it. So I could say, hey, we're going to pass in the customer, pass in the customer ID from that list and match it with the customer ID from this list. And so now we're only going to see the information that gets passed through for that particular customer as I select it. So just to show you, like, even though it's been moved to the data lake, we still give you the capability of connecting all that information. And again, we can then embed it right inside of whatever system that we need. Again, as the example we were talking about today was around finance. And there we go. You can see that looks like all of these ones completed, and literally only 56 of those tables had. Oh, actually, no, it's still going. Sorry, yeah, it hasn't completed. There's still a 1,000 tables that it's working on. So there you go. Only 80 of them had data in there right now. Okay, let me go back. Let's just wrap up. I want to talk about a couple just key things just to recap. This with the Popdock Data Lake upload tool and Popdock, you're able to securely connect to your Dynamics SL data on-prem, right? There's no need to put a gateway or anything like that, or open up ports in your firewall or holes in your firewall. This is something that can run on-premise and push to the cloud, which I think makes everything a lot more efficient. We can quickly and easily move that data to the data lake, right? Whether it is all of the tables, right, archiving the entire database, or if it's just a couple of quick queries that you're using today already, or maybe it's around AR and AP and inventory, whatever it may be, you have choices on what you want to move and archive, and before you turn off that SQL Server for good. And then finally, this tool really gives you a simple way of not only uploading it, but accessing the data and reporting on it without leaving Dynamics 365 Finance. I think that's kind of one of the biggest things is bringing the data to wherever you work. And again, in this case, because it is a scenario where you maybe have moved from one ERP to the other, this is a really powerful way to pull all of that history and not lose it as you transition. Okay, well, I would like to encourage anybody that has questions to use the questions pane of the GoToWebinar, and we'll get through as many as we can today. Okay, first one I have here is what versions are supported for SL? That's a good question. We go back to 2011. So 2011, I think 2015 and 2018 are the three major versions, and then we'll support everything in there. The reason we only go back to 2011 for this particular solution is because that's when quick queries were first introduced, and so we're utilizing those as a basis, I guess, to bring in all of that information into the new system. If there are older versions, what I will say is that we will have a SQL option that we could still bring everything in, but it may not have those lists where we have some of the intelligence where it's already combined data from multiple tables. Okay, good question. Is there any charge for the Popdock Data Lake upload tool? Okay, no, and I'll maybe qualify this a couple of ways. We don't charge for the tool itself, the Popdock Data Lake Upload tool. Now it does, it's all based off of Popdock, so you will have a Popdock subscription in order to utilize it, but it is there's no additional cost. I will mention one other thing is some of our partners and customers do ask us to help them in the process, and so we do have a service if you want to engage our team that will kind of walk through all the scenarios and help you move that data as we move forward. So that is something as well. Okay, let's see. Looks like a couple more questions coming in. Good, keep them coming, everybody. So I'm just expanding this out. Okay. Some questions on how much does a data lake cost? Yeah, that's a really good question, because with Microsoft, an Azure Data Lake is kind of done on consumption. So it does depend on the amount of data that you're storing. So again, if you're storing 100 gigabytes versus 10 terabytes, there will be some different cost mechanisms there. But let me say this: if you're storing less than 100 gigabytes of data, and let's say you're accessing it tens of thousands of times a month, you're probably going to be paying under $20 for this. So for most of the people I've seen on this, again, under 100 gigabyte, that's what you'd be paying. If you have, again, 20 years and you'll have over a terabyte of data, and maybe some people are hitting it way more often, then that's certainly something that you could see a little higher, but again, it's pretty cost effective as you look at storage options. So again, if you have a terabyte of data, it's probably really important to bring that available, and it's not an issue. Okay, it looks like the last question I have in here is how many users do, well, okay, let me read it a little different. Does the number of SL users need to match the Popdock users? It doesn't. It's something that, even though we're coming from SL, and again, I'm guessing this person probably meant, do we have to match the number of finance users? Do they need to match? We don't really need, because we're embedding it inside of there, and so you have options on who gets access and granted to it or not, and so that's controlled without necessarily needing to have a user inside of Popdock. So you have some options on that. Okay, I think that's the last question I have. I want to thank everybody for their time today. Again, if you do have some additional questions, I would encourage you to email sales@e1solutions.com, and we'll be happy to get you pointed in the right direction. So thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful rest of your day.